It feels like every month or so, we renew the debate about how to define male and female, what we might call biological sex. Who gets to decide what the definitions are, and based on what traits? But have you ever wondered about insects? Do things tend to be fairly straightforward for them, where females have eggs, female reproductive parts, and female sex chromosomes? And males have sperm, male reproductive parts, and male sex chromosomes. Maybe that's the assumption, right? Well, today we're going to look at insects, one of Earth's most ancient taxonomic groups, to see if our usual frameworks for defining male and female still hold. Are there any unassailable truths out there that clearly differentiate between male and female insects? Well, let's find out. If we're going to judge whether or not various characteristics are good indicators of what makes a male insect male and a female insect female, we first need a baseline characteristic. What would make us call one insect female or male in the first place? Is there something reliable that insects of a particular sex have in common? Well, the closest thing we might get to here is gamete size. Females produce the larger, more resource-rich gametes, called eggs, and males produce the smaller, often more mobile gametes, called sperm. So we can use this definition to determine which individuals of a particular species are male and which are female. We can then look at other characteristics that we tend to think of as uniquely male or uniquely female and see how well they match up. Now, of course, it would be fair to point out that not all insects produce gametes. So if we're using this as the defining characteristic, well, it's not really universal, is it? Most honeybees, for example, may not produce gametes at all, but we could still refer to them as female. And there are cases of gyandromorphism from time to time where, due to certain chromosomal arrangements, a single insect individual can develop both male and female reproductive tissues. But as far as we know, there are no insects where one individual can produce both eggs and sperm. So, while things are never quite as neat and tidy as we make them out to be, most biologists would probably agree that calling an insect male or female based on gamete size is still broadly valid, even though exceptions abound. One of the most popular ways that folks like to determine male versus female is on a genetic or chromosomal level. In humans, for example, we often think of females as having sex chromosomes that we would label XX. These two chromosomes look alike and have genes that produce proteins that typically result in the development of female anatomy. In humans, we often think of males as having one of those X chromosomes paired with a short and stunted Y chromosome. The Y chromosome carries a unique gene that's not typically found on the X chromosome, called the SRY gene. SRY stands for sex-determining region of the Y chromosome. It makes a protein called the testes determining factor, and, well, you can imagine what that's used for. So what about insects? Insects actually exhibit a remarkable diversity of genetic arrangements related to determining biological sex. Many grasshopper species, for instance, follow the XO system, where females are XX, but males possess only one X chromosome and no Y chromosome at all. Female grasshoppers, like many species in the Acrididae family, have 24 chromosomes. That's 12 pairs, one pair coming from each parent. But males have 23 chromosomes, 12 coming from the mom grasshopper, but only 11 coming from the dad grasshopper. So the oh so important Y chromosome isn't a requirement for maleness in grasshoppers. More dramatically, bees, ants, and wasps use a system called Haplodiploidy. In this system, unfertilized eggs become haploid males. That means that they only have half the typical number of chromosomes. And then the fertilized eggs develop into diploid females, meaning they have a full complement of paired chromosomes, kind of like we do. But these bees, ants, and wasps literally don't have sex chromosomes at all. Sex is determined by whether or not individuals have one set or two sets of chromosomes. On the other hand, you have Lepidoptera, so moths and butterflies. They do have sex chromosomes. We've labeled those Z and W instead of X and Y like what we have in humans. So if in humans females are typically XX, then in Lepidoptera, females would probably be ZZ, right? Nope. The Z chromosome carries a gene called DMRT1. Don't worry about what that stands for. But for moths and butterflies, individuals need two copies of that gene to become male. So males are ZZ, and females are ZW. So genetics don't really give us a reliable method that we can apply across species in the insect world in order to determine biological sex. One species may use XO, another may use Haplodiploidy, and a third might have Z and W chromosomes. Now, I suppose if you know exactly which system an insect species uses, you could probably infer who's male and who's female. But in terms of our rating, this would probably have to land somewhere down on the unreliable side of the scale. Next up, external anatomy. Now, surely, if something has obvious protruding external reproductive anatomy, then it's male. And if it doesn't have obvious protruding external reproductive anatomy, then it's female, right? Well, the insect world is kind of diverse in this regard. In many species, the male has an intromittent organ called an aedeagus, or aedeagus, that is used to deposit sperm inside the female. But its size, shape, and actually whether it's even present at all can vary widely. Some species have a very simple, tubular aedeagus for transferring sperm directly. Others may have a more elaborate setup complete with hooks or spines. Then there are entire groups like Collembola or Diplura that don't have an external aedeagus at all. The male just deposits a spermatophore on a surface, and the female picks it up on her own. A spermatophore is essentially a packaged capsule of sperm, often with additional nutrients that can be safely transferred to or collected by the female. In these insects, no direct insertion is necessary, just the proper placement of the spermatophore for the female to retrieve. Meanwhile, female insects also may or may not have protruding external anatomy associated with reproduction. In many members of the order Orthoptera, such as grasshoppers, katydids, and crickets, and certain groups within the order Hymenoptera, especially various wasp species and sawflies, females possess what's called a true ovipositor, which is an egg-laying structure that develops from paired outgrowths on abdominal segments 8 and 9. These outgrowths, often called gonapophyses, can fuse or interlock, forming what looks like a spear or a pair of curved blades or even a stinging apparatus. In other groups, such as certain flies and beetles, the female may not have a rigid egg-laying tube at all. Instead, her final abdominal segments can telescope in and out to place eggs. As a result, in these species, you may see a single protruding structure when the female is actively depositing eggs. Still, other female insects have no external anatomy of any kind in this regard, like cockroaches, some beetles, and some moths, which simply deposit their eggs or egg case via an opening at the end of their abdomen. Then you have a few cases where things are completely flipped around. In Neotrogla curvata, the female have what can really only be described as a curved penis-like organ termed the gynosome, while males have a chamber where they produce their gametes. During mating, the female inserts the gynosome into the male to collect the spermatophores. This arrangement kind of inverts the usual expectations about which sex has the protruding external reproductive anatomy. So all told, external anatomy isn't a surefire indicator of biological sex for insects. But since a majority of insect species actually do use the aedeagus, from moths to beetles to true flies, we could probably give this approach a reliability rating somewhere in the middle. All right, let's move on to our last major indicator of biological sex in insects: reproductive roles and reproductive behaviors. A lot of people may have well-developed ideas about typical male and female behavior in the animal kingdom. Males are known to compete for mates, sometimes violently, whereas females often invest more heavily in offspring development and offspring care. There are all kinds of examples of this in the insect world, from stag beetles, where males rely on oversized mandibles to battle rivals over breeding territories, to fruit flies, where males aggressively guard potential mates. Even in burying beetles, where both sexes help to prepare and bury a small carcass by stripping fur or feathers and then molding it into a brood ball, which then serves as both food and as a nursery for the developing larva, it's the female that often devotes more effort and more time maintaining the carcass and feeding the larva and fending off intruders, showing a tilt towards greater parental investment from female insects. But there is a good degree of variability. For example, in large cooperative societies, like honeybees, the queen is the primary reproductive female, but the majority of the colony consists of female workers who perform just about every task imaginable, from brood care to foraging to colony defense, and rarely lay eggs themselves. Non-sterile males exist mainly for mating with the queen and are often expelled or left to die once they're no longer needed. When it comes to competition for mates, well, that can take some unexpected directions as well, especially for species where the males produce that nutrient-rich spermatophore. That's a small packet containing sperm plus nutrients that the female can use to boost egg production. In some of these cases, instead of males battling for female attention, females can engage in direct contests or ritualized displays to win male favor to secure the valuable spermatophore. Like in certain bush cricket species, where females have been known to ward off rivals by aggressively posturing or even by directly grappling with them. Even care of eggs isn't always a reliable predictor either. You have species like giant water bugs, where the female lays her eggs on the male's back, and the male dutifully carries them around until they hatch. So after all that, where do we rate reproductive roles and reproductive behaviors in terms of an indicator of biological sex? Again, probably somewhere in the middle. Reliable in some instances, but far from a universal truth. If we want to complicate things even further, what do we do with species that, for most of the time, have only one biological sex? Species like this are called parthenogentic. Partheno coming from the Greek parthenos, meaning virgin or unmated, and gentic coming from genesis, meaning origin or start. In these species, females can reproduce without fertilization. No sperm, no mating, no males required. For example, in some species of stick insect in the genus Timema, populations consist entirely of females who lay eggs that develop into genetic clones. Reproduction just happens. And when that's the norm, distinctions of male and female can seem kind of irrelevant. There is a twist though. In these all-female Timema populations, rare males do appear, albeit quite infrequently, and occasionally they'll mate with these parthenogentic females. This cryptic sex reintroduces a dash of genetic recombination, helping the populations dodge some of the long-term pitfalls that come with purely clonal reproduction. Because insect species like these Timema stick bugs can go for long stretches of time without males, it challenges the idea that two sexes are even needed in every case. Because here, most of the time, sperm just isn't required. When it comes down to it, these examples illustrate how usual hallmarks of male and female can blur once we delve into the insect world's astonishing biodiversity. Whether it's parthenogenesis, reversed external anatomy, or haplodiploidy, there's always an exception waiting to challenge our neat and tidy definitions. Well, that's all for today. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.